Hello, and this is a quick kind of policy-oriented, we're not studying the policy chapter. I won't have you read it, but I've decided to add a couple of study guide questions on it and do a quick video lecture about it. Now, this video lecture, interestingly enough, is going to be viewed by graduate students in adult education that are learning about the community college movement. I get honored to teach in a few graduate classes every now and then, but I thought this actually would be helpful for us, and I will cover some of these study guide questions in class. So instead of reading an entire policy chapter, we're going to do a few slides on the American education policy, and it's really about navigating uncertainty. I'll cover 5 large issues and then talk a little bit about some of the minor issues and then a conclusion. So I hope you enjoy this. So here's what we'll chat about. First, the big 5 issues that are dominating the Trump educational agenda, the best of the rest, a whole bunch of stuff, and then a couple of slides on conclusion and where we're headed. So the Trump education agenda, this is not one of the most fleshed out pieces of policy from the Trump administration. Here's a slide for Betsy DeVos, who is the new education secretary. I would say, like many of the secretarial appointments, Betsy comes from, I'd say, the moneyed class. She's connected to the billions of Amway. She's from Michigan, a staunch Republican, and has been an ardent supporter of school choice, as in the charter school movement. Not much from her a lot on the post-secondary education agenda. So the big 5 issues: DACA, international education, federal regulation, public speech on campus, and student loans and financial aid. Now, DACA, if you aren't familiar with it, is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And this is part of the new kind of right movement that we're seeing all across the globe, in France, England, and Brexit, recently in the Netherlands. It's all about immigration. And so Obama had deferred action for childhood arrivals. That deferment will end in a couple of years. The White House currently is kind of in a debate on this. Some say let the 4 years go and let it expire and send children back, end this. Others say we actually need to reach out and help DACA children. Again, this affects community colleges, post-secondary movement in general, and community colleges in specific. International education has been one with the travel ban that's been off again, on again, federal court cases about it. So extreme vetting is really the clue here. That we thought it was pretty extreme. It will get more extreme. In the Trump agenda is eliminating J visas, which has a lot to do with summer work abroad, and then eliminating H-1B visas. Now, for community colleges, neither of these are very heavy in terms of numbers, but for example, research institutions and institutions with study abroad, the J visas for students and the H-1B visas for faculty members from other countries that teach. Federal regulation, so a big push to lower the amount of federal regulations, particularly for teacher preparation and other things. The biggest one, probably most controversial, is the loosening of gainful employment. And if you're not familiar with that, it says basically the amount of money that someone can earn should be a certain percentage of how much their student loans are. And this is what's been used to really go after the for-profit institutions which burn financial aid and put people out in the market with low-paying jobs. So we do see that. It does help the community college in some degrees, but it probably helps the for-profits a lot more. A lot of talk about redefining the credit hour, which would be true regardless of who is president of the United States, because I think the notion of sitting in a seat for a certain amount of instruction is slowly becoming less and less the thing that it was, and more about what students are learning, and the whole notion of actually giving students some type of degree or credential based upon the outcomes that they can demonstrate, as opposed to the number of hours they sat in a seat and what grade they earned. And a lot more state discretion. So any Republican president is going to be pushing for more state discretion and less federal regulation. In terms of speech on campus, this is part of a larger Trump agenda issue connected to political correctness, a notion from the conservative right of this country that, frankly, institutions of higher educations are hornets' nests of liberals who are indoctrinating the young 18 to 24-year-olds, and those professors need to be held accountable for what they say. And then, of course, professors are saying this is free speech in the classroom. Very much a symbolic argument on both sides. The reality is that students, we're going to teach students to learn what they're going to learn. I would say professors probably lean a little bit more to the left than right, but there are universities and students on both sides of the agenda. For community colleges, it's not as much the lessening of political correctness as it is the erosion of free speech in the classroom. We're seeing more hate speech on campus, seeing more incivility on campus, and trying to really, it's not as much about political correctness, but about learning some basic rules of civility while one is learning to be a critical thinker. The other is defunding schools. Forcing political correctness. UC Berkeley kind of leads that list. Now that's one of those, it's like the building of the wall and a few other things. It's a celebrity saying something very intentional to grab a lot of attention. There's no real serious thought that we would defund certain schools because they're on some politometer of political correctness. Community colleges will get a pass on this one. I don't see us in this fight at all. Student loans and financial aid, is really interesting for a long time. People, and still today, the high cost of education is one of the number one issues in the American public's eye. Thankfully, healthcare costs keep going up. Bad thing from a policy point of view, good thing if you're in higher education, because otherwise we'd be the number one thing people be yelling about. But really, the Obama funded some initiatives off of taking money away from the banks. And when they took that money away, they financed student loans through the government, the way they do housing through Fannie Mae and the other organizations. So Donald Trump wants to undo that, not a surprise, because there are banks that kind of make money off of that. Change in loan payment systems. Now, this is possibly a very good one. Students that have loans, and I do have a daughter that who is in her later 30s, still paying off financial loans when she was in college. And so the ability, I think those loans are probably around 5 or 8%. She could refinance them to 2%. And so that would be a good thing to be able to do that. Increasing Pell, I think that's one that's on the agenda all the time, particularly increasing Pell to permit students to use it year-round. That would be huge for community colleges. What we're learning is the fall-to-fall retention rate, which at our school sometimes is between 50 and 60%. People struggle when you let them out for 3 months at a time and they start to come back. So the notion of part-time students getting 30 hours a year by going 3 continuous semesters is a much better graduation strategy than having 15 or 18 credits that to call yourself full-time in the fall and spring and then somehow make that work and then expect all to be good every fall again. So the best of the rest, there's a whole bunch out there on this one. The FY18 budget, Trump is going to make some deep cuts to fund some of the things he wants to do. National Education for Arts, National Endowment for Education and Humanities, and several other programs will be on the list. I fully suspect there'll be some cost shifting of Medicaid to the states. That's another big one. SNAP, WIOA, TANF. So these are all programs for the most needy of our population. There'll probably be cuts or restrictions on those. So you say, what does that have to do with higher education? Well, that deeply affects the ability of many community college students to be able to come to college. Somewhere between the Pell Grant and these benefits, we have Project Go here. We help thousands of students with public benefits. So without those benefits, it really will be a barrier to their attendance at school. Tax reform and the debt ceiling, going to be a really hot issue. A lot of tax credits are being pushed as part of financing the Trump package, and the debt ceiling is definitely going to be an issue. There's enough money coming in federal income taxes to probably hold us through September, but sometime in early October there will be a huge showdown yet again, and I think the Trump group is going to brace itself for not for maybe a lengthy shutdown of the federal government. They've been very slow to fill jobs. I think they see this as a cost strategy. One of the things they want to fund is an infrastructure capital bill, billions of dollars to help redo some of the infrastructure. Both sides of the aisle particularly like that strategy. It's a matter of who's going to and how we're going to pay for it. Charitable contributions is a really interesting one. There is some talk about taking away charitable contributions for post-secondary institutions, which we'll see kind of where that one goes, but small private liberal arts colleges would really struggle with that. Zero state tax, so zero state tax credits is a really interesting one. It's all about the ability that if you have money, you can kind of buy tax credits for yourself by taking them, buy them from the state. It's kind of what we do in sustainability, where you might have a brownfield on a site and you become sustainable by purchasing. You can clean it up, or you could be a site that cleans up somebody else's brownfield and then gets credits for it. So think of it that way. It's like you can help pay for somebody else's problem and get tax credits for it. The bigger one is the American Opportunity Tax Credit and the ability of people to get tax credits for college education, a very popular one. And then lastly, reorganizing the Department of Education. I think that's true for a lot of departments, a much slimmer, smaller one. Currently, when I'm cutting this video, only a handful of the Department of Education people have been picked. I think, frankly, there might be a move to not just go slowly, but to actually not fill several of the other undersecretary positions. Now, I did want to kind of conclude by looking at some of the data that's attached to it. So this is the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which, again, very popular issue. It's a very good thing. People can, get money. They're paying money for school. They're getting a tax credit for it. But look carefully. $100,000 and above is 75%. So the theme is very much the Trump theme in education is going to be the theme, immigration, about who's in this country. That's kind of a number one. Number two is tax credits that really help people in the upper 5 and 1 percentile of incomes, and then deep cuts in some programs, particularly to the neediest people, or some regulation on those programs of entitlements, moving that money to other places. So here's the conclusion part, which is more about post-secondary education in general across all the sectors. Number one, we're looking at an environment of uncertainty, particularly around enrollment, and we are seeing a flattened, if not declining. Ohio's got a declining high school market, so therefore we're seeing 3 and 4% enrollment declines every year. It's part of the demographics. We are overdue for what would be politely called a market correction, like we had in 2008. That could, if that were to happen, that would send millions of students back into kind of community colleges. Community colleges in Ohio, they're funded on performance, not on enrollment. So in schools that fund on enrollment, this will give them a boon of money, a little bit of lag. It might take a year or two to get it there, and then it will go away because as the market improves, then those students go down. In Ohio, there is no boon. It's on performance, so it will be a much deeper lag. So it'll be interesting to see how that would work. Clearly, there is a disinvestment in public education. People are not supporting, and states are not putting money into public education. So it does mean that community colleges, and in specific, have to really gear up more of the grants and the solicitation through foundation offices. Tri-C has a very good one, but many community colleges are really playing catch-up compared to their four-year partners. An increase in lesser prepared students, I think that is definitely going to be the case. And I think the philosophy of the community college is we have to preserve the access mission. The four-year schools will tighten enrollment requirements, I think is what's going to happen over time. So the two-year schools will definitely be taking to preserve that access mission, and definitely having more unprepared students, and kind of how to deal with that, despite having the Common Core and everything that goes with it. Increased accountability is all day long. Now, Tri-C has been a leader in metrics, and as tough as our numbers are someday to look at, we're very open about them. But I think that accountability is going to ratchet up, even under a Trump administration that's going to regulate less in this area. And leadership turnover is really big. When I first started my leadership journey as a dean, which is now 12 years ago, The chief academic officers, I looked at some data, and presidencies lasted about 8 years, and chief academic officers lasted 6 to 7 years. Today, that same data is 3.8 years for presidents, and academics sometimes even less. So the turnover in educational leadership is absolutely incredible right now. It's not just that baby boomers are retiring, it's the fact that it's getting harder and harder. That uncertainty just ahead. Presidents, like coaches and other very visible faces, CEOs of an organization, there's far more movement today, and it's harder and harder because change, like change at Cuyahoga Community College, change in our equity, particularly African American students of color, which are 54% of the campus here at East and probably 30-something% of college-wide. It takes 7 or 8 years of deep systems change to really influence something. So that would be like 2 or 3 groups of leadership. So it's going to be harder to do change that way. So I hope that you've gotten a lot out of this. Here's some conclusions. I'm going to wave back and wave. That puts the light back on. So there's no real clear specifics on the Trump education agenda yet, as there are on many other policy areas, but this one even less. Number 2, that uncertainty and validity of the market and validity of policy is going to continue to occur. So one of the skills of being a leader right now in post-secondary education is adjusting to uncertainty on a regular basis. But number 3, and one I really want to stress, the money that is spent, the federal money that is spent and the state money that is spent on post-secondary education is the best return on investment. I think early education actually outreturns post-secondary education, but any money spent on education has a huge return in terms of people progressing to a better life, having higher wages, becoming productive members of an economy, putting money into the tax system, as opposed to other dollars that are spent in other directions. We have to continue to tell our story in times when education is valued less. And I think that is a story that is going to be something for the next decade or two. We are going to see a modest public investment in education. It might be in more of the infrastructure side. We have to learn operating to slim down, but maybe we're going to need some infrastructure money. Community colleges typically celebrating 50th anniversaries, like school systems in the suburbs, all facing ancient public facilities that really need some type of upgrading. So all of that definitely on the agenda. I hope it's helpful to you just in education in general. Thank you.